So we just finished up with the legislative branch. We're going to dive a little bit more, uh, or get a little bit more specific in terms of how a bill actually becomes a law. So before we get into that, we need to talk a little bit about what types of bills there are. You have private bills and public bills. Private bills really they're not really private; they just apply to an individual or a group of individuals. Where public bills apply to the entire nation. So those would be things like tax cuts, health insurance, gun control, abortion, civil rights, uh, stuff like that, policies like that. Um, you also have resolutions. So a joint resolution is passed by both houses of Congress, where a simple resolution covers matters only impacting one house of Congress, and it's passed by that house of Congress alone. A concurrent resolution covers matters requiring both the House and the Senate, but something on which a law is not needed. And the last thing to really know when it comes to bills is what is called a rider. A rider is a provision on a subject other than the one covered in the bill. So maybe the bill discusses tax cuts for professional athletes, and within that the long language within the bill, there's something in there about um, voting in special elections. So that would be an example. The rider would be voting in special elections in that example. So, in regards to passing a bill, there are multiple steps. Steps one is writing the bill. So, ideas must come from citizens, lobbyists, interest groups, or the executive branch. And once it is written and introduced, it is given a name. So, if it's the first bill of a new session in the Senate, it'll be called S.1 or S1. If it's the first bill of the new session in the House of Representatives, it'll be called HR1. The next step is the committee action. So committees are going to review, revise, or they're going to even kill the bill. You have committee hearings that gather information from different experts in terms of the possible impacts of the bill. They then have a markup session where they decide what changes to make to the bill. And then they can report the bill. So when they report the bill, the committee will decide to either report it or kill it. After reporting the bill, you have floor action. This is where the debating and amending of the bill takes place. So pros, cons are both discussed during this step. This is where amendments can be added to the bill. This is where you can add in riders to the bill, etc., things like that. But it takes a majority vote of members present to make changes to the bill. Once things are amended to the bill, it's then voted on, and a quorum is needed to vote. And we talked about what a quorum was needed, or talked about what a quorum is in our last video. And then a majority vote is needed by all members present to pass a bill on to the next step. The final steps in passing bills include passing both houses in identical form. Okay, this is where a conference committee action will take place where members from both houses work on changes that will pass in both houses. They'll draft the final version of the bill and they will send it to the president, who can either make the bill into a law. When the president receives the bill, they have 10 days to decide on what to do with that bill. And the president can either choose to pass it or he can choose to veto it. And a veto is simply a rejection of the bill by the president. He can also have what is called a pocket veto. This is when the president kills a bill passed during the last 10 days Congress is in session. All right, so he can simply just refuse to do anything with it, and it'll expire as soon as the congressional session ends. And if he simply vetoes it, Congress can then override that veto with 2/3 majority vote in both the Senate and the House of Representatives. After a bill becomes a law, it is then registered with the National Archives and Records Service. So an example of a law being named would be Public Law 194 under the 112th Congress. That would be registered as PL 112194. Bills very rarely become laws. Fewer than 10% of bills actually become laws, and it is a complicated process. Uh, there are multiple reasons why so few become laws. One being the length of that process. Two being the fact that both the Senate and the House need to compromise. Some bills are simply just symbolic gestures. They have no intention on actually passing the bills. And then it's also complicated because there are intended, or these bills are intended to address complicated problems. So these bills, in response, have to be well thought out, and it's impossible to think of every scenario, but they try to come up with the best solution to these complicated issues.